Welcome back, Walter Football Odd Shopper, the two of us together. Well, that's Walt, I'm Eitan, so technically the two of us, but the two entities continue as Walter is back with 5 more plays to look at. Look, can't go undefeated every week, but you finish up, and that's what's most important, my friend. So we ask everybody, hit the thumbs up, subscribe here. We'll tell you all about what's happening at walterfootball.com, especially as mock drafts continue to get updated. Some really good money-making opportunities, but 5 picks to jump into this week, and we always look to go perfect, right? This doesn't always happen.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have losses sometimes. Just lost my first bowl game against the spread. So you're going to have some losses, and it's just frustrating sometimes because, when you know you have the right side, like in that Eagles-Cowboys game, when it was a 3-point game with 2 minutes left, you're like, okay, we're going to cover. And then in the back of my head, I'm like, all they need to do is not fumble. And then like a second later, Miles Sanders fumbles. The Cowboys kick the field goal and win by 6, and the line's 5.5. But, we can bounce back, and it's still 3 in 2 weeks. So let's bounce back to 5-0 again.
Absolutely. And that's the most important part is we finish up. All right. So that's the beauty of what you're doing here is if you don't go 5-0, we're still going to finish up. But look, 5 more opportunities to nail it. Let's begin with the Cardinals-Falcons game.
Yeah, so I was waiting on news here, and I was happy to get it before the show. I was waiting on news for Colt McCoy. He practiced fully on Wednesday, so that was a good sign. I wanted him to play and not Trace McSorley, so I wanted to bet Arizona plus 3.5 against the Falcons. This is actually like a step down in competition for Colt McCoy. In 3 of his 4 games that he played this year, he's gone against the 49ers, the Patriots, and the Broncos. Like, those are 3 of the better defenses in the NFL. Now he gets the Atlanta, which is one of the worst defenses in the NFL. And the Cardinals have They have good talent, like on offense. DeAndre Hopkins, Marquise Brown, James Conner, even Greg Dortch is going nuts last game. So McCoy, I feel like he can have a nice game here against an Atlanta pass defense, which is just terrible. And Atlanta overall is terrible. The last time they lost by more than 3 points was won by more than 3 points. It was week 6 against San Francisco. And that was a game where the 49ers were missing half their starters. Like Nick Bosa was out, Trent Williams was out, like George Kittle, like all their guys were out in that game. And that's why Atlanta won. And ever since then, they've covered the spread once. Remember they started 6-0 against the spread. I think they're like 1-5-2 or 1-6-2 against the spread since. So Atlanta is just terrible. I don't know what they're doing, favored by more than 3. Arizona plus 3.5 seems like a gift. And I think we have motivation on our side with Arizona. Like, first of all, J.J. Watt announced that he's going to be retiring. So I think the players around him are going to play hard.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Stokastic NFL Tournament Strategy Show, where usually every Saturday throughout the season, Neil and I break down the Sunday slate, all of our favorite tournament plays to play in large field tournaments. Last week, there was a little bit of a mix-up because there was a Saturday slate, so Neil and I actually did a deeper dive show and broke down the Saturday slate, but we're back to break down the Sunday slate today. As you guys come in, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and also shout out to PrizePicks, who is the sponsor of today's show. And Neil, I'm very curious to ask you how you're handling this slate from this standpoint. Is back in the day when there was only 17 NFL games, you basically had the first 16 games of the year where teams played competitively, but we're starting to see teams rest players. We already saw that with the Titans the other day. There are teams that are playing in games that are not consequential. How does that have impact on the lineups that you're building for tomorrow?
It doesn't have a huge impact for me this week. I mean, we saw with the Titans, we expected, Robert Woods and Treylon Burks to play less than a full game, and then they played the entire game. I think that's most likely what most teams are going to be doing this week. Of course, there will probably be a few exceptions here where there are going to be, maybe the Jaguars don't give their guys full run. Maybe there will be a few exceptions, but in general, I think that if guys are active, they're probably going to be playing their usual reps or close to it for the most part. So I don't think it's going to be a huge factor for me this week. Maybe I'll pick and choose some spots where players, maybe I give a slight downgrade to like the Jaguars players, just because there have been rumblings that they might not play the full game and those kinds of scenarios, especially because then they have to win the following week. So it's a little bit more likely that I think they're going to rest their players. But in general, I think I'm largely playing it straight up. How about you?
Well, it's kind of funny because, I mean, there are certain players where, like Antonio Gibson is out. And I don't know whether we'd say that's due to rest, injury, maybe a combination of the two of it being the end of the season. But then you got guys, like Brian Robinson looks exceptionally well right now in our projection. So there's stuff like that to pay attention to, because these slates do kind of play out a little more like NBA type slates. If you guys also play NBA DFS, where you're going to get players that are ruled out tonight. We get those, the Schefter and Rappaport tweets that come out around midnight Eastern time. They're going to be ruling guys out that we might not have otherwise expected. Like you said, ETN, we don't really know what's going to happen with them. All indications have been that they're going to play these guys in full, but who knows? Maybe something happens where he does get ruled out and we have other things to pay attention to. But I would just say that make sure that you're more attuned to the news for this Sunday slate, even than you would be for other ones, because we really could get guys ruled out like up until the final minutes before game starts.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. We need to pay more attention. I'm seeing people talking about my mic being a little bit low. Mike just pointed out as well. My Shure app, I had not noticed it. It says that it's disconnected, so I'm trying to adjust. But I guess I'll just talk a little bit louder in the meantime. Yeah, I think that's a good point, that we need to be just paying attention to news. Like if I don't get news that somebody like Alvin Kamara, like the Saints, don't have. Actually, maybe they do. I forget if they have something to play for. But in general, if we don't get news that players are out or they're going to be rested a little bit more than usual, I'm going to play it straight up. But I think this is more of a news-based slate than we usually have.
Yeah, for sure. And that is definitely going to come into play as we start to talk about some of the value options that are going to be coming up in a little bit. But first, shout out to Jorge Giacomi, who left us a nice super chat here, $50. Just want to wish you a happy new year. All the best for you and your fam on this 2023. Sending all the best wishes and vibes, and thanks for everything this 2022. Looking forward to 2023, full of DFS wins with you guys. Happy New Year's to everybody. Jorge, also, thank you for the super chat, and Happy New Year to you as well. And anything else you want to talk about, or should we just get into this slate, Neil?
I want to tell you that I was able to open my Shure app and turn up my microphone a little bit. So hopefully it's better now. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else to it. I mean, obviously what I want to talk about is my best ball teams, but I'm going to save you guys from that. We won't talk about my best ball teams. We can move on to talking about the slate.
But best ball has become like a cult, and I know people love it online, but
I'm a big part of that cult now.
You're part of the best ball cult for sure. But it's people go crazy. They like to post their lineups, but also they like to see other people's lineups as well, which is stunning to me because people send me pictures of their fantasy teams and they'll ask me, like one of my friends I grew up with all the time has asked me, should I start this backup running back over this guy? And I never give a shit. Yeah. Like, I never care, but it seems like people are actually invested in other people's best ball teams. So it's become a whole thing within a thing. I don't personally play NFL best ball. I do have a bunch of NBA best ball lineups, but good luck to you as well, Neil, because how many teams do you have left?
I have two teams left in the Best Ball Mania 3 final. So it started out with 450,000 teams. We're down to the final 470. Top prize is $2 million. Second place is $1 million. So a lot of money at stake. But to be honest, my teams are pretty thin. Like theoretically, I can field full rosters, which some teams can't, but I'm not all that optimistic about them getting to the top.
Well, I hope you come in first and second.
Me too. That's what I was hoping for.
Yeah, that's what I'll be rooting for. So hopefully Neil wins that. And Neil's already won a Millie Maker in DFS. Why not one in best ball too? Right?
That's right. I could be the first ever to do both.
Has nobody done it before?
I assume not. Best ball hasn't been around with Millie Makers all that long.
If not, you should just claim you're the first.
I'll just say that I was the first either way. Yeah.
Yeah. Who's going to fact check that?
Yeah.
And who's going to somebody's come out and say like, no, that's bullshit. You'd be like, hey, I have more money than you. And then what are they going to do about it? There's nothing they can do.
Exactly.
You won Millie Makers at that point. But there's Millie Makers we won in DFS this weekend as well. And as per usual, we're going to start with some of the quarterbacks and some of the stacks that we might want to be building around for this Sunday slate, and not the usual quarterbacks that are atop of the of the top stacks to, at least for DraftKings purposes. For FanDuel, we do have the Kansas City Chiefs towards the top. That's something that's a little bit more normal for them going up against the Denver Broncos. 13% ownership going to Patrick Mahomes and a 17% top stack score. We'll talk about them in a second. But first, on DraftKings, we have the number. Well, actually, the Chiefs, I should reiterate, they're number one on DraftKings and FanDuel, but because they're so expensive on DK, their stack rating ends up coming out a lot lower than it normally would. But the teams that have the top SAP scores, we've got the Detroit Lions with Jared Goff. We've got the New York Jets, which never feels great. We've got the Packers. Aaron Rodgers has sucked all year, but he has played a little bit better as of late. But let's start with the Detroit Lions, because they have the highest top stack score when we're factoring in the top stack odds and also the pricing on them. How high of a priority are the Lions going to be for you to build around?
I mean, moderate. So they're the top stack on the entire slate. They look great. They're playing against the Bears defense that's 29th in terms of pass DVOA per Football Outsiders. Great spot, obviously, for the Lions. They have, I believe, the highest implied team total on the entire slate. You've got Jared Goff at 5,600. So they make all the sense in the world. Probably they would be my first place I'd go in like a cash setting or a small field GPP setting. So in those kinds of settings, very high priority. In a large field GPP, slightly lesser of a priority just because we have some negative leverage there. We've got Jared Goff coming in now at 13% ownership, 11% chance of the Lions being the top stack, 10% chance of being the top value stack. Still a certainly playable lineup. If you can call any of these quarterbacks chalky, Goff is the chalkiest at 13% projected ownership. Some slight negative leverage there, but it's a great spot. He's 5,600. You compare him with Amon-Ra St. Brown, who looks great. So I get it. I get why he's getting the ownership that he is. I'm not like trying to, full fade him, but I'll probably be underweight to the field on Goff just because there are other quarterbacks who are also pretty interesting coming in at much lower ownership.
Yeah, and that's where I want to ask you about how you're going to handle Patrick Mahomes, because there are some differences across DraftKings and FanDuel. So for DraftKings, we do have the highest top stack odds on the Chiefs, but they are so expensive that they actually rate out as a fairly poor rated stack for us just because their top value score is so low that I think that what's going to depend on Patrick Mahomes, at least for DraftKings purposes, is going to be how many players get ruled out and how much value do we have to be able to comfortably get to them. FanDuel's a different story. FanDuel, with the pricing generally being softer, the top stack odds still have them with the top stack rating. But what are you going to do to try to fit in the Chiefs when they are so expensive, if it is a path you want to go down?
Yeah, that's a really good point, that it will be kind of news dependent with the Chiefs, because it's going to be tough if everybody's healthy to just because they're so expensive. It's going to be tough to play them, but we could get news that makes them a lot more playable. And if we get news where guys are sitting, I think Kamara now has been ruled in, but we've still got some expensive players who could be ruled out closer to lock, which would open up some value, maybe make it a little bit more playable. They're certainly playable regardless. I mean, you can find some value at running back and wide receiver. There are places to find guys who are under 4,500, but it is going to be tough. We have Mahomes projected for 6.5% ownership, 12.4% chance of the Chiefs being the top stack. As you said, they're not from a value perspective, 4.7% chance of being the top value stack. Don't love that. I'm trying to think of how I'm going to make it work with Mahomes, because you probably want to play Travis Kelce in those lineups. Maybe the double stack actually will make it a little bit easier, because if you go for to anybody other than Juju, relatively cheap receiving options at wide receiver for the Chiefs, they haven't really worked out all that much this year. In general, they've been disappointing. Outside of Kelce and occasionally Juju, they have not been what we want them to be. But maybe that's a way to make it work, is to use one of those guys who's a little bit less expensive. We still don't have Mecole Hardman back, which makes it a little bit easier to play, a Justin Watson or a Marquez Valdez-Scantling if we want to fall for that again. And then I guess you could run it back. I mean, you have some relatively cheap options on the Broncos here, so that would maybe make it a little bit easier if you go in with I'm trying to even think if they is Kendall Hinton playable. We've got both Judy and Sutton now. Dulcich is out. I guess you could run it back with the tight end with Dulcich out. Maybe I'm trying to remember who even is the tight end for the Broncos this week with Dulcich out, because it's not Alberto. I know that it's Saubert, maybe I forget. Anyway, you could maybe throw in a cheaper run back from the Broncos, make it a little bit more playable, or the Broncos, Latavius Murray, I guess, could be playable. It'll be tough, but we'll try and find some value as we talk about the slate.
Is there reason to think that Jerick McKinnon is kind of a wide receiver? If you just look at his target share, and he was crazy popular last week and ended up with ownership way well above what anybody had him for projected ownership. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, he was like 32 or 33% owned in the Millie Maker, somewhere along those lines for Jerick McKinnon. And he scored a touchdown now in 4 consecutive games. That's going to be randomness. But one of the reasons I think it's been so difficult to figure out where the target share is going with Patrick Mahomes as the quarterback is because not only do they have a lot of wide receivers to throw to, Travis Kelce is the one safe option. McKinnon's kind of been the second wide receiver for this team behind Travis Kelce. And not that he's playing wide receiver, but his targets over the last handful of weeks, 3 last week, although did score a touchdown. For that, 8 targets, 9 targets, 2 targets, 6 targets, just 1 target, but then 8 targets, 8 targets. If he had wide receiver eligibility, would he just be viewed differently by the field? Because he kind of seems to be playing a somewhat similar role to what Deebo Samuel has played for the 49ers.
Yeah, it's a really good point. He is running a lot of routes. I mean, just looking at the past several weeks, last week he only ran 15 routes, still over 50%. But the week prior to that, 29, the week prior to that, 22. He's just been out there running routes. And as you said, he's had 9 and 8 targets in 2 of the last 3 games. So just been very involved. He's had at least 1 red zone carry in each of the past 4 games, including 5 red zone carries in week 13. If he were wide receiver eligible, I don't even, would that make him more or less would people want to play him more or less if he was wide receiver eligible?
I think more people would stack him with Mahomes. I think the one thing I'm going to change with some of my Chief stacks is I'm going to just allow for Chief stacks instead of being wide receiver tight ends with Mahomes. I'm going to add in running backs as well because McKinnon is clearly very correlated with Patrick Mahomes. He's been so involved in the passing game. Like I said, I mean, he's caught, 5 receiving touchdowns or something like that, or 4 receiving touchdowns over the course of the last 4 weeks. He's so involved in the passing game. It's just because he has the running back eligibility. People are like, oh, it's so hard to figure out who the wide receivers are for the Chiefs. It's kind of been Travis Kelce and Jerick McKinnon as of late, with Juju Smith-Schuster as well. Like, those are the 3 go-to targets in the Chiefs offense at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, that's perfectly reasonable stack right there. Just go straight up Mahomes, Kelce, and McKinnon. But McKinnon is not that inexpensive at this point, right? Yeah. He's gotten a little bit up there. He's closer to 6,000. Do I have this? Pull up my my running backs here. But I think he's close to 6,000. Okay,
he is 6,000 on DraftKings. He's not projected for that much ownership, although he hasn't been projected for that much ownership the last few weeks either. He's $6,800 on FanDuel, which relative to FanDuel pricing is still somewhat cheap, and he is not projected for ownership, at least as of now.
Yeah, it's really interesting. At 6,800, that's much cheaper relative to DraftKings. Of course, you don't get the full PPR, and part of the bonus of Jerick McKinnon is that he is very involved in the passing game. So it kind of makes sense that he would be less expensive on FanDuel than DraftKings. Yeah, if he comes in at, I mean, we have him at 4% ownership on DraftKings. That's would be surprising to me if it comes in that low at 6,000. I think people are going to want to play McKinnon, but currently we have a little bit of positive leverage on him. I think if he's under 10% owned, I still think that he's, even if he comes in higher than 10%, he's probably a viable play, just because I think that there is some chance that the Chiefs just decide to run it out in this game. Like, the Broncos defense can't stop anything. Why risk anything, through the air? Why not just run it out with McKinnon and Pacheco? Probably not. That's not usually the Chiefs' game plan. They like to throw the ball, but it wouldn't be surprising to me if they do run the ball a little bit more than usual in this game, just because it should be an easy win for the Chiefs. I think McKinnon is a fine play. I also have some interest in Isaiah Pacheco, not nearly as involved in the passing game, but again, just because I think that there's some chance that the Chiefs do run a little bit more than usual in this game. Pacheco is 5,600, 4.7% projected ownership. And I think Pacheco is likelier to stay kind of in that range than McKinnon is. We have projected 3% chance of being optimal. So negative leverage there, but I do have some interest in both of these Chiefs running backs.
So then one of the other quarterbacks that will stack, at least, that looks pretty moderate in the mid-range, and also a game that presumably could have blowout risk, the Jacksonville Jaguars against the Houston Texans, where we've got Lawrence right now, 5% ownership, 5% chance to be a top stack. First of all, do you have any concerns that he might not play tomorrow just because he is dealing with the toe injury?
Yeah, so a little bit. I mean, I think they have literally nothing to play for. If he actually has a toe injury, I don't see why you risk it with him when they, week 18 is all that matters for the Jaguars. So if he has a real injury, I probably wouldn't play. I would expect him to sit I also think that there's some chance that they, are sort of fabricating to some extent the extent of the injury, calling him questionable, just because they've come out and said we're going to play to win. And I don't know. I don't know if they really. Why would they want to play to win with all their guys in a game that is completely meaningless to them, with the following week being extremely important for them? Yeah, I think that's the one game that I am a little bit more concerned than I normally would be with players playing the full game. Like I could see them having Lawrence come out and play the first half, maybe not play the second half. Who knows? They could just play it straight up, just like the Titans did. Maybe they will play it straight up. The Titans did, other than of course Derrick Henry not playing, which who knows if that was a real injury or just giving him some rest. But yeah, that's the one spot that I'm a little bit hesitant with the Jaguars, just because this game is entirely meaningless, and the following week is for all the marbles. So I'm playing a little bit safe there.
We've got a super chat here from Sam Van Dam. He's got a season-long championship. He currently has the Jaguars defense, but he says he could pivot to the Falcons or Browns. What are our thoughts? So I'm going to look at some of our projections here. And, defense is always a little bit random to predict. But one thing that stands out to me pretty immediately, on DraftKings, we do the Jaguars at $3,600 as one of the most expensive defenses on the slate. As are the Browns at $3,400, but we do have the Jaguars for half a fantasy point more. Realistically, in terms of which defense to play, it's hard to know ahead of time. The projections on defenses, here's the difference between the projection for the highest projected defense for us this weekend versus the lowest projected. The highest is the Chiefs at 9 fantasy points. The lowest is the Bears at 4 fantasy points. That's the difference between the high end and the low end. Compare that to like wide receiver, where it's like at the top end, you might have a Justin Jefferson. At the low end, it's just, some idiot who's going to go out there and, run 3 routes or something like that over the course of the game. So there isn't that much difference from the best defenses to the worst. I'd feel best about the Jaguars just because of the matchup they have against the Texans, and the Texans been an absolute train wreck. So if we're just talking about safety, which is I think what you're looking for in a season-long head-to-head, I would side with the Jaguars there. But it's a less important decision than you probably think it is.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm probably going with the Jaguars there. All 3 of those are pretty bad defenses, so I'm not all that confident in any of them. I do have a little bit of concern about the Jaguars, maybe pulling some guys a little bit early, but in general, I think the Jaguars, even if they do play their backups against this Texans offense, they're probably going to be just fine. So I probably go to the Jaguars. I have a little bit of interest in playing the Falcons defense against David Blau, but with James Conner healthy, I still think I'd probably go Jaguars.
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well. And now getting back to the quarterbacks, and we were just talking about Trevor Lawrence and the quarterback situation for Jacksonville. But another quarterback who I'm kind of curious to see what you think about, because it's been a while since we had a popular Justin Fields. Remember, there was that stretch of time where Justin Fields was crazy popular for, 3-4 weeks in a row, and he was just absolutely crushing it. And then he had one game where he got hurt and kind of had an off game. The field never really went back to Justin Fields. This week, though, 7% owned on DraftKings, making him the 3rd most popular quarterback on the slate. For DK purposes, 11% on FanDuel. Is it time to go back to Justin Fields? Are you wary of the ownership? How are you going to handle a guy who's been a breakout fantasy star and one of the most popular quarterbacks right now?
Yeah, it's a really tough spot just because he is 7,900, getting a little bit of ownership. I've been saying all week that I want to play Justin Fields. I think on the Wednesday show, he was down below 4% projected ownership, which is part of the reason I was like, I have a lot of interest in Justin Fields if he's going to be under 4% owned against this Lions defense. Now, as you said, he's up above 7% projected ownership, makes me like him a little bit less here. But he still has a great matchup. The harder part for me is who do you pair him with? Like we've talked about this a lot. Like generally, I want to be pairing my quarterbacks with somebody. I know you can play Justin Fields naked. It just makes it a bigger parlay essentially that you have to hit if you don't have any kind of correlation there. So I would prefer to play my quarterback with at least one pass catcher. And then of course, the natural place you want to go is Cole Kmet. But I think that tandem is going to be relatively high owned. Like a good chunk of the people who play Justin Fields are going to have Cole Kmet in there. So makes it a little bit tough, just that he doesn't have any real pass catching options that I think you can play that are going to be at all contrarian. But I do have some interest. It's hard not to have some interest in Justin Fields because, he's chasing some. He could be chasing the highest rushing output ever for a quarterback is on on the in play for Justin Fields in the next couple of weeks. It's a great matchup with the Lions. So I can't say that I have no interest in Justin Fields, even at 7,900. I think that, he clearly has that 35-40 fantasy point upside, especially on DraftKings with the 100-yard bonus at 100 yards rushing. Sorry, the 100-yard rushing bonus. You get 3 bonus points. So I have some interest in Justin Fields. It's a little bit tough just because the pairing is a little bit tough to get different, but Fields Kmet I think is a fine pairing anyway.
Yeah, Justin Fields, he's hit that 100-yard rushing bonus on a few occasions this year, and some of he's done it on like 3 carries into the game where it's like, oh look, a 50-yard touchdown run from Justin, a 50-yard run for Justin Fields, and then like the next series he'll have a 75-yard run or something crazy like that, because we've seen games from him so far this year. November 6th against the Dolphins, he had a game where he had 15 carries for 178 yards. That's ridiculous. And the game after that, 13 carries for 147 yards. I do worry a little bit that maybe they try to, I mean, I know if I was the Bears, I would say, hey, maybe these last couple of games that don't mean anything, run less. We don't need you to get hurt going forward. But here's the reality. He's averaging in the last couple of months of games, like 12 rushing attempts per game. He averages 7 yards per carry. You just do the math, and this is a quarterback next year who could be averaging 80, 90 rushing yards per game if he stays healthy, just based on his current production. So really crazy stuff for a quarterback. I might even bet him to lead the league in rushing next year, getting way ahead of ourselves, but just something that's been on my mind. As for other quarterbacks, are there going to be any other priorities to build stacks around?
I mean, I think you can always go back to Kirk Cousins, Justin Jefferson, do the TJ Hawkinson, throw that Vikings stack in there. Coming in at 4.9% ownership for Kirk Cousins, 9.3% chance to be in the top stack, 4.5% chance to be in the top value stack. So not as great there, but certainly in play. On the other side, I think you could also go to Aaron Rodgers against the Vikings defense. It's just a really bad defense, and that's kind of a legacy. I think this is a game that we could see some fireworks between the Vikings and the Packers. Probably I'd like it better if Christian Watson is active. I think I'd be more inclined to play Aaron Rodgers with Watson and maybe a Lazard or something. But I think certainly in play. Mike White, so much better than Zach Wilson, and they've got this matchup with the Seattle defense. Hard not to have some interest in Mike White. Doesn't really have much rushing upside, but that you can also pair Mike White with the running backs. You can throw Michael Carter in there potentially in a stack. Obviously, Garrett Wilson is a guy you're going to want in your Mike White stacks. But in this matchup at 4.9% projected ownership, we have that stack being the top value 7.9% of the time. So some positive leverage there. I think I'd like to go there a bit. I think you brought up. Did you bring up Brock Purdy earlier? Oh, that was before the show. We were talking with Mike.
So before the show, because Mike was trying to figure out who to play in this tournament he does with his friends, although maybe tournament is the right way to put it, because it's just for his finals, it's a 10-man field. And I was just running just unabated lineups in our projections, just in terms of, all right, if I just run our projections, build out a few hundred lineups, which quarterbacks appear most often as being kind of optimal. And Brock Purdy was somebody who just showed up in lineups because he is so cheap and projects decently well. So that's somebody who, if I was to take some chances on as a punt, I wouldn't mind it just because the price point is so low.
And it's a great matchup with the Raiders. So I like the Brock Purdy. And of course, you can pair him with Christian McCaffrey, throw him in the stack. You can take care of your tight end with George Kittle. I think actually Brandon Ayuk looks pretty good. So I like that call as well. The Brock Purdy is an interesting play this week. Just a couple other names I wanted to throw out there. Desmond Ridder, Alex brought him up. I think that he's in a very nice spot against this Arizona defense, coming in at 2.2% projected ownership. He's cheap, 3.4% chance to be in the top value stack. We don't really know what we have in Desmond Ridder yet, but obviously you can pair him with Drake London. You can throw Tyler Algier into the stack as well. So I do like the Desmond Ridder stack. I had a couple others. Hang on one sec. Let me refresh my memory.
While you're looking at that, so with Desmond Ridder, one thing that's really nice is Drake London's one of the most talented young receivers that I think we have in the NFL right now, but he was just not getting targets for a while because Marcus Mariota absolutely stinks. So it was just hard for him to be all that productive. Now, is Ridder going to be better than Mariota? He's certainly not going to be worse. But one thing that was pretty nice about last week is just to see what they had in Ridder, he threw the ball way more than Mariota did, which I think makes sense. You just want to see what kind of talent he has and if he's somebody you could potentially build around. And the guy he was locked onto was Drake London. London ended up catching 7 passes for 96 yards, double-digit targets, or 9 targets. But either way, London has seen a big increase in terms of how much he's getting looked at in the offense with Ritter at the quarterback. So it does give us somebody who we know we could stack with Ritter, and that does make it somewhat appealing as well for a low salary.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a really nice cheap stack that I think has pretty high upside. Another one I'll throw out there is the Patriots. It's kind of ugly. You don't love playing Mac Jones in a stack, but 3.8% projected ownership against this Miami defense is a pretty nice spot. 4.5% chance to be in the top value stack. I don't hate the idea of playing the Patriots here. You can also include Ramondre Stevenson in your Patriots stacks, which is kind of nice. And then I noticed that David Blau, where he actually looks good in the top stack. So I don't know that I'm going to go there, but 1.7% projected ownership on David Blau. We have them the top stack, Arizona the top stack 3.7% of the time. I guess there are crazier things you could do than playing David Blau with DeAndre Hopkins. Not probably somewhere I'm going to go, but I do see positive leverage there. That's sort of interesting. And then I have to bring up the ugliest stack just to upset people. You could go back to a Broncos stack. The one game that Russell Wilson did was looking good this year and looked like he was going to put out a big fantasy output was against the Chiefs. Of course, we don't really care. We don't really want to chase those kind of stats from box score watching, but it is like we liked him that week, and there's a reason we liked him that week, and it's because they're playing against the Chiefs, where they're probably going to need to be throwing to try to keep up, and the Chiefs have a bad defense. So I think you could go back to a Russell Wilson stack as well.
All right, so let's move on to the running backs. But first, if you guys want to get access to all the tools we have at Stokastic.com, and not just for football, but basketball, because something, if you guys are considering trying out other sports as well, especially with football regular season wrapping up, we're going to have basketball also covered in our Stokastic Platinum Plus package. And you could sign up and get 2 months for free when you sign up with our deal at BetMGM. So you click on the link below, and all it's going to take is a $10 deposit over at BetMGM. You place one bet, and that gets you 2 free months Stokastic Plus Platinum. So that's a lot of really good value. But in addition to that, you're just getting a risk-free bet of up to $1,000. So if you're somebody who's getting more seriously involved in sports betting, your first bet refunded up to $1,000 in addition to the 2 free months Stokastic Plus Platinum. So a lot of value that's being encapsulated there. Running back position. Now, to start, it's hard to get away from the top end if you're paying up a running back for Christian McCaffrey, certainly where the field is going. So McCaffrey this week, 25% projected ownership, but it more or less looks justified right now in our boom bust tool, where we have him being optimal nearly 30% of the time on DraftKings, and similar scenario on FanDuel, 25.5% ownership, 25.5% optimal score. When it comes to paying up for Christian McCaffrey, if you have the space to do it, are you going to, or do you have some concerns about his workload considering how comfortable the 49ers are sitting in the standings?
Yeah, I think if I can pay up for Christian McCaffrey, I'm going to. I think he's probably going to be a full go. I guess I've been expecting San Francisco to play this one straight up. I think that's going to be my expectation going in. Of course, it's an easy matchup for them against Jarrett Stidham, but I think, Christian McCaffrey, I would expect to continue to have a similar workload to what he's been having. He's going to be involved in the passing game, the running game. It's a great spot against the Raiders defense. As you said, we've got some positive leverage on Christian McCaffrey. I haven't even thought about the Niners, maybe not giving them a full go, because I haven't heard any kind of rumors that they're going to be, resting their guys at all. I guess maybe I should be worried about it a little bit, but I think in week 17 with a full another week after that, I think week 18 is where you really start to worry about that. I think they're probably still going to play McCaffrey straight up.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel as well. Now, maybe he doesn't get 30 touches, but I do think that his ceiling in terms of touches is probably capped. The other thing, too, is, with the Raiders benching Derek Carr and Stidham starting quarterback, this is going to be a really easy matchup for them. They could start in really good field position. I haven't looked at all the touchdown props for this weekend. I would imagine, though, McCaffrey's price is one of the, if not the most likely player to end up finding the end zone this weekend. So a lot of safety there. And if I was paying up for one running back, he would be the guy I would go to. But if you were pivoting off of McCaffrey, is there a running back that stands out to you as an expensive option you like as a pivot off of McCaffrey?
Man, Josh Jacobs in the toughest of tough spots. Eckler against the Rams, I guess, is kind of interesting. We've got him at 7% ownership. We only have him optimal 4.5% of the time, so some negative leverage there. Do we want to play Saquon this week? I guess that's you could always consider playing Saquon just because he is involved in all aspects of the game. The Colts kind of a middling matchup for the Giants, 13th against the pass, 15th against the run. It's probably Saquon. If I'm going to one of these guys, I think it's probably Saquon at 8,000. If I have to pivot to some other expensive guy, I think I'm more inclined, to be honest, to go a little bit cheaper. I guess if you include James Conner in there, I actually have a lot of interest in James Conner. We have actually massive negative leverage on James Conner, so I'm sort of going counter to the tools here. But James Conner, if you include 7,200 among the pay up options, looks great against this Falcons defense for me. He's just been so involved lately for the Cardinals, and I would expect with David Blau at quarterback, they're not going to start just throwing the ball all the time. It's probably still going to be James Conner's. He's going to be the workhorse for the Cardinals. So I actually think James Conner is a guy that I will have a lot of interest in potentially if he's good to go, which I think he is. He's just been dealing with an illness. I think he practiced in full on Friday, or at least partial practice. So I think he's going to be good to go against the Falcons defense that is 23rd against the rush, 30th against the pass. Just a great spot. So I think probably James Conner for me.
Speaking to his workload, last week against the Buccaneers, also a fairly, I'm not going to say difficult matchup, but he wasn't in the best situation to succeed just because the offense was so banged up. And still, you end up getting a good fantasy game out of him because, like you said, so involved. 15 rushing attempts for him, also had a rushing touchdown, and it was targeted 8 times in the passing game, caught 7 passes, and that's been pretty regular for him. The last 3 weeks, 15, 16, and 15 carries, 7 targets, 3 targets, 6 targets. And then we go back the week before where he was a little bit less involved in the passing game because it was competitive. He had 25 carries for 120 yards and then 3 targets in the passing game. So Connor, massive workload for him. And it does seem like he's somebody that could benefit from really any situation, just really the workload more than anything, because it's not going to be because the offense is any good, but it might not matter if Connor's going to touch the ball 30 times. Yeah. If we're moving down a little bit in the pricing range here, if we're going to go a little bit cheaper in the mid range, who to you are the top options to target once we're getting into that middle tier of running backs?
Yeah, so I just want to take a step right below James Conner. I see Aaron Jones and Dalvin Cook, both guys that I will have interest in, depending on Jones's health. I believe Jones is good to go. We've got him at 5.1% projected ownership, 10.4% chance to be an optimal. In this NFC North matchup, just every defense in the NFC North is bad against the run. So I do have interest in both Aaron Jones and Dalvin Cook in a matchup with each other. Both look pretty good here. And then, of course, David Montgomery, continuing that trend. David Montgomery is at 6,900 facing the Lions defense. We have him projected for 4.5% ownership, 5.1% chance to be an optimal. So these are kind of the, right in between mid-range to high-end range. I kind of like all of these NFC North running backs. I think they have some upside here. Ramondre Stevenson, now we've got news that Damian Harris is off the injury report, should be a full go, but I kind of think that it's still Ramondre Stevenson's backfield. Like I think he's still like going to get, 70% of the snaps. Maybe that's wrong. We don't really know what to expect. Certainly throws a wrinkle in things that we have Damian Harris back here, but I still think Ramondre Stevenson is going to be very involved against pretty bad Miami defense, at least a defense that has some holes in it for Miami. I think New England should be able to move the ball, and Ramondre Stevenson's just 6,800, very involved in the passing game. He'll get some rushes too. So I do have interest in Ramondre Stevenson at 6,800. Travis Etienne, it's obviously a smash spot against the Texans. The thing for me, my concern, of course, as we've talked about, is the Jaguars just not giving their guys full go. So I think there's some chance that they get, Jermichael Hasty a little bit more involved, get the backups involved there. So maybe Travis Etienne loses a little bit of work, but I think he's still playable at 6,400 against the Texans, just in case he does get 20 plus looks. What do you think about Travis Etienne? You'd play him at all, or is that too risky with the Jaguars having nothing to play for here?
It's such an uncertain situation, but yet such a good spot for him. This seems to me like the perfect spot to look at what are the ownership projections by the time we get to tomorrow afternoon, and just align myself with the field on him. Right? I don't want to get beat by something I can't really predict, because also, NFL coaches are so full of shit with coach speak by telling us stuff and then not really being totally transparent on what they're doing. So like, hey, we're not going to rest guys, and then we'll see guys, only play a half or something like that. I think the safest way to approach it, and because if you guys have a really good feel on the Jaguars and you are convinced the starters are playing the entire game, or if you really feel for sure the starters are only playing a half a game or the starters aren't playing at all, then by all means, go ahead and take a stand. I really have no clue. Whatever the field does, that's what I'm going to do with him, and that's what I'm going to feel comfortable with. He's not going to beat me one way or the other.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good stance to take. Just try to get close to where the field is. I will say my friend, who is a diehard Jags fan for some reason, he's from Alaska. For some reason, he's a diehard Jags fan. He says there's no chance that they're going to sit Trevor Lawrence this week. So he thinks they're going to play it straight up. So factor that in if you want to. I see Stephen Liebowitz making a good point. He says, the concern I have with Stevenson's load is a little bit of a fumble problem lately, and Belichick doesn't like to put up with that. I will say, though, Belichick did come out and he said something positive, like he's not concerned about it or something. He trusts Ramondre. So, that's at least he gave him a public vote of confidence for whatever that's worth. I think that I'm not really that concerned with it just because he's loved Ramondre all year. And I think that he's still standing behind him. We'll see. With Damian Harris back, maybe he has an extra little incentive to not play Ramondre quite as much. There are a couple reasons to have a little bit of concern with Ramondre, but the matchup is great. The 6,800 price tag is great. So I still have some interest in Ramondre, but yeah, I can see why you would have concern there. One other guy I want to mention. So Aaron Jones played last week. He was active and he just didn't get his full workload. I think there's some chance that happens again. And then AJ Dillon will be playing against this Vikings defense at really low ownership. He could get extra looks and he's just 5,800. So I actually think that I'm kind of inclined to go to AJ Dillon and hope that Aaron Jones is active and just not as involved as he usually would be. And then AJ Dillon's a little bit more involved at 5,800. I think that's a place that I might take a few shots. What do you think of Dillon?
For a little bit more of a contrarian playing tournaments, that certainly makes sense. If we're talking about that price range as a whole, I think by far the best play is Brian Robinson Jr. With us now knowing that Antonio Gibson is not going to be playing, and we just saw Washington call up running back from the practice squad. Let me look up who his name was. Not that it's going to be in.
Was it Jared Patterson?
Yes, it was. It was Patterson called up from the practice squad. I think Robinson's going to play a massive role. He's got a great story this year. I think it's definitely been an intention of Washington to try to get the ball to Brian Robinson and see what they have in him this year. Totally full strength now after he got shot 5 times in the offseason right before the season started. So Robinson, I think he's the best points per dollar play, not just at running back, but on the entire slate on both FanDuel and DraftKings. The ownership is fairly modest right now. 14% projected for him on DraftKings. On FanDuel, we have Brian Robinson projected a little bit higher, 19.5% ownership, but I think he's the best points per dollar play of the entire slate. That's the guy I really want to target at running back.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I was moving down by salary rather than by my level of interest. Brian Robinson, if he's coming in at 14% ownership, we have him optimal 29% of the time. With Antonio Gibson out, we're just expecting Brian Robinson to take on even more of the workload. It's a smash spot against the Browns, who are 30th in terms of rush DVOA. Commanders have a 21.5 implied team total. Robinson, not very involved in the passing game, but maybe he gets a little bit of an uptick with Antonio Gibson out. He hasn't gotten double-digit routes run in a game since week 10. So in general, not very involved in the passing game. But maybe he does get a little bit of a boost there as well with Antonio Gibson out. Regardless, he should continue to get right around 20 carries against a bad Browns defense. So I will have interest either way, even if he doesn't see an uptick in potential receiving volume. Yeah, he looks great and not currently projecting for as much ownership as he should be getting at 5,200. I'm right there with you on Brian Robinson.
And then what are the other running backs you're looking to roster to save salary with? Because Brian Robinson, to me, is such a good option that if he doesn't pick up more ownership, I don't even know how often I'm going to be playing other guys in this cheap price range. Robinson just looks like a guy who'd be in a really large percentage of my lineups. But who are the other standouts that you could use to save salary with that running back position?
Yeah, I mean, Tyler Algier right there. He's 50 right there in terms of price. He's 5,300. He's just been so involved lately. The past couple of games, 17 and 18 carries. He ran 9 routes in week 15, and then 17 in week 16. Ran routes on 49% of passing plays for the Falcons. Now he's obviously in a great matchup with the Cardinals. So I do have some interest in Tyler Algier. I already talked about how I kind of like that Desmond Ridder stack, and you can stack Ridder with Algier. So I'd say that's a place that I'd willing to go. Miles Sanders actually looks pretty great in our tools at 5,900, 15.3% projected ownership, 16.3% chance of being optimal. I don't really know if I like him better or worse, depending on, I guess Hurts is doubtful. We're expecting Hurts not to play.
Hurts is out, yeah.
Yeah, so Miles Sanders probably more likely to be a little bit more involved. So I do have some interest in Miles Sanders. I know Jamal Williams is chasing some incentives. I don't know how much you want to factor that in, but it's at least worth considering. The coaches know about the incentives. Jamal Williams is 5,000. His price has come way down as DeAndre Swift has been a little bit more involved kind of sporadically. 3.5% projected ownership on Jamal Williams with a 6.8% chance of being optimal. I think that I'd be willing to go there again. As you say, they get down to the 1 yard line. Intentionally, they go down. They take a knee at the 1 yard line so they can get Jamal Williams into the end zone. So I think that, again, that's another one of those NFC North matchups where I'm willing to attack those bad run defenses. I think I could go to Jamal Williams. DeAndre Swift, I don't know. I guess you could go there too, 5,300. He's getting more ownership, though. He's at 9% ownership. I'm probably less inclined to go to DeAndre Swift. We just got news before the show that the Browns called up running back from the practice squad, I believe, which makes me think there's a decent chance that I think Nick Chubb has been questionable, or there's been issues with Nick Chubb all week being a little bit like maybe he's not going to play. If Nick Chubb is out, do we go to Kareem Hunt here? Do you think we go to Kareem Hunt?
Boy, it's been such a rough season for him.
Yeah.
But if there's ever been a spot for him to succeed, you would think it would be this one. And also, Chubb has taken on a really heavy workload, and 27 years old, fairly ancient for a running back at this point in the NFL as well. So it would make sense to me that Nick Chubb gets sat in this game. The only reason I think that he might not, like, if there were no other factors, I probably think Nick Chubb would sit. But I really do think the Browns are probably trying to see what they have in Deshaun Watson and how their offense looks for the future. I have a feeling a lot of buyers are more, at least at this point, based on how poor Watson has looked and the amount of money they're playing him. But I would think that's probably the reason that Chubb is most likely to play, is they probably just want to put out potentially a healthy offense to see what they could like what they could look like heading into next year.
Yeah, that's a good point. They might want to play, but I mean, if he is banged up at all, I think that they would probably sit him. So it all kind of comes down to health, but at least a good sign for him potentially sitting that they called up another running back. Another guy I think that I want to mention is Michael Carter. I haven't seen what his ownership is yet, but obviously gets a boost with Mike White starting. Mike White tends to target his running backs more than Zach Wilson. Michael Carter has been very involved. He's been running routes a ton, ran 14 routes last week, the week before 21, the week before that 30 routes run, 59% of passing plays he ran routes on. So Michael Carter is just very involved in the passing game, and definitely always love pairing him with Mike White. What do we have? We have his ownership at 0.9%. We actually have negative leverage on that 0.7% chance of being optimal, but that's a spot that I'm willing to play a little bit of Michael Carter. I mean, I guess that probably the reason that we have negative leverage there is, as you said, we just have Brian Robinson at 5,200. We've got a lot of pretty solid options in that low 5K range, which is, I think that's probably where I'm going to be going for them. Well, I guess I like some of those 7,000 running backs as well, but we've got a number of pretty good options right around that, 5,000 to 5,500 kind of range. And Michael Carter is a guy that I have some interest in. Do you think you'd play any Michael Carter here?
I would say, honestly, probably not. I'm looking through the lineups that I ran before when I was talking to Mike before the show, and he was trying to ask me who I thought that he should play in his 10-man league for this weekend. And I'm looking through those lineups. I'd ran 300 of them. Michael Carter didn't come up in any of them. So that makes me think probably not.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. I don't think he projects extremely well. As I said, we've got some negative leverage there, but just as a guy that we know could get 10 targets from Mike White based on what we saw mostly, I think last year he was targeting running backs more. I think that I have some interest just in the largest field GPPs. Probably not playing him anywhere except for like the big milli maker, but I think that he's at least a player that I have interest in those large field GPPs.
All right, so let's move on to the pass catchers, wide receivers, and tight ends. But first, if you guys want access to our tools, we talked about BetMGM before, but maybe you're in a state that does not have legal sports betting. You probably have access to Prize Picks because they have props you can play against the house over there. And it is available in most states that don't have legal sports betting. And when you sign up at Prize Picks using our link, you're going to get up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit and 1 free month of Stokastic Plus Platinum. And also, as per usual, we always have our 3-day free trial going on. So if you guys want to get access to all of our tools for the week 17 of the NFL season, you could just get 3 days for free if you've never signed up before by clicking on the link below in the description box. And that's it. No other catches to it. Player projections, ownership projections, our boom bust tool, and the new lineup generator that we have over at Stokastic.com, which is going to be the easiest way possible for you guys to build a handful of lineups in just a few seconds. Just click a couple of buttons and the lineup generator is going to spit out what we believe are plus EV lineups for you. Now let's talk about the wide receivers, Neil. And Is this a slate where you think you're going to be spending up for some of the top end wide receivers? Justin Jefferson, there are some incentives for him in terms of records because he has the possibility to end up becoming the all-time NFL leader for receptions in a single season. But he's very expensive. He's $9,500 over on DraftKings. The price point on FanDuel for Justin Jefferson is it would have helped if I spelled his name right and didn't spell it as Justin Jefferson, because that isn't going to help him come up. Justin Jefferson, $9,200 on FanDuel, projected for 18% ownership. So I think here's the comparison point a lot of people would make. If you had the option to spend up between Christian McCaffrey or Justin Jefferson, which of them would you choose?
Man, that's a really tough call. I think I'd probably choose McCaffrey because of the matchup. I think they're similar in terms of incentives. I think they actually are competing with each other. I think both the Niners and the Vikings have a shot at the number 2 seed. Still, they're still kind of fighting for positioning a little bit in the NFC. But I think McCaffrey has the better matchup. I mean, the Packers defense is a little bit of a run funnel, much worse against the run. So I think that I'd have to go McCaffrey against the Raiders. It's close. Jefferson's a little bit more expensive. I still really like Justin Jefferson here. I think that it's, he absolutely torched the Packers in week 1. I think that he's obviously, they don't have anybody that can stop Justin Jefferson. So I'm still really excited to play some Justin Jefferson. But if I have to just choose one, I'm probably going to McCaffrey there. How about you?
I think I'm going to lean towards McCaffrey just because there aren't really other running backs to spend up for, and he is overall my favorite spend up option on the slate. And also, we have some positive leverage on Christian McCaffrey as opposed to negative leverage on Justin Jefferson, boom bust tool. So my preference is going to be McCaffrey. It's going to be really difficult to get both of them into the same lineups. They're both so expensive. And I know that it's going to be a question. People are going to be DMing me tomorrow. Hey, Greg, I can only spend up for one player in cash games or tournaments. Do I go to McCaffrey or Jefferson? So just getting ahead of it, my answer is going to be Christian McCaffrey for those kind of scenarios. But as far as the other pay up options go on the slate, Neil, are any of them going to be priorities as far as spend up options at wide receiver? Because to me, a lot of the best plays do look to be in the mid range.
Yeah, I mean, it also obviously depends on what you consider high range in terms of salary. But obviously, if you consider Amon-Ra St. Brown to be high end, which I do at 7,800, I think that he's a pretty big priority here against this Bears defense. It's a great spot for Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's 7,800, projected for 23% ownership, 23% chance to be an optimal. So just he's neutral, but sometimes you got to play some of those neutral guys just because he projects extremely well. The matchup looks good. The price savings are pretty nice relative to Justin Jefferson. He's got Jared Goff. He's got his usual quarterback in there, which you don't have with Miami. Some of the guys you want to play are Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill. Well, we've got Tua out. Of course, Teddy Bridgewater, I think, is one of the better backup quarterbacks we have in the league, but still it's a downgrade to not have Tua in there. So you kind of have that going against the Miami guys. You've got Blau in there for Arizona, which is obviously a downgrade for DeAndre Hopkins. We've got Gardner Minshew in there in Philadelphia. So Detroit is one of the rare spots where they actually have their starting quarterback playing this week. Las Vegas, another example. Like all of these guys just don't have their quarterbacks outside of Jefferson and Amon-Ra St. Brown. And Amon-Ra St. Brown is relatively cheap and a great matchup. So I would say Amon-Ra St. Brown, the obvious guy you want to play in the high end of wide receivers outside of Justin Jefferson, just because all these guys have warts. They all have, their backup quarterback play and not all that confident in them. So I think that he's probably outside of Jefferson. Amon-Ra is the next place I'm going. Do you like any of these guys better than I do? The Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, AJ Brown, Hopkins, Waddle, Smith?
So the one I'll be getting to the most, which I think people have watched the show all year. I've been on Amon-Ra St. Brown most weeks this year. I think he makes a whole lot of sense, but the ownership's about fair. But I don't know I'm going to be spending up at wide receiver all that often this week. Here's the price range I really like. That mid-range. Garrett Wilson, Mike White back at quarterback. I love getting to Garrett Wilson. He's looked way different with White as the quarterback than he has when we've seen Zach Wilson play quarterback. Another one for me. Christian Watson. Is he going to play or is he going to sit? Currently questionable. He's been a little bit iffy on the injury report. Here's the good news, though. Regardless of whether he's in or out, I think there's good opportunity here. If he plays, I love him. And he's only projected for 4% ownership right now. If he sits, I like Allen Lazard a lot at $5,400. Aaron Rodgers, whatever injury it was that was bothering him earlier in the year, he has looked better as of late. He's still clearly not the quarterback that won the MVP in the past, but still, Rodgers has looked to be in better form lately. And so that's what I'm going to be doing. The Packers wide receivers, Christian Watson, if he plays, if he sits, I'll be getting to Aaron Lazard a lot. And then somebody else we talked about earlier, great spot for Drake London. north of 30 targets across the last 3 games, just under 100 receiving yards last game. They're letting Ritter throw the ball a lot more to kind of see what they have in him. Those are the guys that I'm really more building around. Like, I'm on Ross St. Brown if I'm paying up. Other than that, Garrett Wilson, Drake London. That's the price range I really think I'm going to be living in at wide out.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me. Those are all guys that I have interest in as well. I throw Jacoby Myers in that kind of price range as well at 5,000 against this Miami defense. I have some interest in. Project for 13.5% ownership, so getting some ownership. But I would say Jacoby Myers is another guy that I have interest in. I'm totally with you on Garrett Wilson, Christian Watson, and or Alan Lazard, depending on whether Watson's status. Yeah, totally with you on all of those guys. We talked about Drake London, as you said. I'm kind of interested also in these cheaper Jets receivers. Just we were talking about are you going to how are you going to get to the Patrick Mahomes stack? Well, I think that's one way to do it, is to play Elijah Moore, Corey Davis. Both these guys very inexpensive and look much better with Mike White. Corey Davis is 3,700, coming in at 3.4% ownership, 6.4% chance of being optimal. Elijah Moore, I think he's 3,500. I need to find him to see what his ownership.
He's 3,500 on DK, projected for just a little bit under 5% ownership. On FanDuel, Elijah Moore is at 53%, also projected for a little bit over 5% ownership.
Yeah, so I think those are both places that I'd be willing to go to save some salary on the low end there. Man, I don't know what to do with Greg Dortch. I'm so disappointed that David Blau is starting for Arizona, because with Colt McCoy, I would have a lot of interest in DeAndre Hopkins, a lot of interest in Greg Dortch, seeing him come back and like be a big part of the game plan for Arizona. I still have some interest. I think that there's some chance that they just keep him as involved, and obviously wasn't like Trace McSorley that was doing things for having a great game helping Greg Dortch. It was probably just the play call. And so at 3,000 against this Falcons secondary, I don't know, Greg Dortch at 4% ownership, I have some interest there. I think that as far as the cheaper guys go, with you, somebody I have some interest in. Tyquan Thornton I'll throw out there also. I think he's questionable right now, but we haven't projected for 1% ownership, 2.8% chance of being optimal against that Miami secondary. I have some interest in Tyquan Thornton at the low end. Adam Thielen, of course, might get lost in the shuffle a little bit with all the trash talk with Justin Jefferson and Jair Alexander. I mean, Adam Thielen's at 5,200 in the same matchup, 2.7% projected ownership, maybe a little bit of interest there. I don't know if I want to go to any of these Kansas City receivers. As we talked about, I've been going to them all year. They've been disappointing me all year. Maybe I'd consider still, just because, again, they're still the Kansas City offense. Like, they're going to put up a lot of points. Would it be that shocking if one of these weeks, can it just happen one of these weeks where one of these other receivers is taking on that role and getting the 4 catches for 4 touchdowns that Travis Kelce saw? Probably not. It's probably not going to happen, but I still think they're probably playable. As far as the low end in price goes, I think that you could consider playing MVS at 4,100, maybe even Justin Watson at 3,000. I guess Kadarius Toney is active now, which cuts into Justin Watson a little bit, but yeah, at least MVS I'd at least consider there. Anybody else that you see that you want to talk about?
Nah, the Chiefs wide receiver situation. We've talked about it almost every week when Mahomes grades out well and when the Chiefs look good as a stack. And then almost every single week, it's none of the receivers go off. We try to figure out like which wide receiver it's going to be, and then it's none of them, just every single time.
Yeah, exactly. It's been a shit show trying to find some Chiefs receiver that we want to play. It has not been working out. Actually, so outside of that, so we talked about Green Bay. If Christian Watson says, I think you actually could consider Romeo Doubs. I guess he's 4,700. The price is more expensive than I thought it was going to be there. We saw him. He was pretty involved when he was on the field last week or 2 weeks ago. So I could see him being pretty involved if Christian Watson misses, but maybe that's a little bit of a thin play. And then DJ Chark actually looks pretty good in the tools. He's somebody that I have some interest in just because Detroit has that great matchup and getting relatively low ownership. We've got Amon-Ra at 23% ownership. He's obviously the alpha. You get it why he's getting the 23% ownership. We've got DJ Chark at just 5.7% projected ownership, and he's only 4,300. We have him optimal 7.1% of the time. So I have some interest there as well.
So let's move on over to the tight end position. And as we're just talking about how hard it is to parse the Kansas City wide receiver situation, not hard at tight end. If you have the money to pay up for somebody this weekend at the tight end spot, you're going to Travis Kelce. Now, it's going to be hard to fit him in when we've already talked about guys like Christian McCaffrey, and we've talked about guys like Justin Jefferson as pay up options. But if you're playing in a lineup and you have the ability to, you're playing Travis Kelce on DraftKings or FanDuel today. Any pushback against that, Neil?
No, if you can fit Travis Kelce. Sorry, I was reading chat. No, I have no pushback to if you can fit Travis Kelce in there, he's the guy you're going to. He's optimal. Just looking at our optimal rate, he is the top by more than 5% currently.
And he's almost double the price of any other tight end as well. So he's just in such a different price range that if you're in a spot where you have salary and you're building your tight end spot out, and that's the last spot in your lineup, you just wouldn't play anybody else, nor would you even consider anybody else, because the next highest priced tight end is George Kittle at $5,900. And there's a few tight ends that I really think I'm going to be targeting this week. One is going to be Travis Kelce. The other is going to be George Kittle. George Kittle with Brock Purdy, massively different than what he looked like with other players who were playing quarterback. And the 49ers have gone through, a few quarterbacks this year. Trey Lance was at QB for them. Jimmy Garoppolo was at QB. And George Kittle, infinitely better with Purdy compared to those other guys. They've seemed to have a really good chemistry. George Kittle's been involved in the red zone. He's been getting way more targets in the passing game. So those are two guys right there, Kelce and Kittle, that I think are pretty hard to get away from. But what do you make of the work that Kittle's gotten with Purdy at QB?
Yeah, I love it. Kittle, 5,900 in a great matchup with the Raiders too. So he's just been more involved with the QB change, and now he's also in a great spot against the Raiders. We do have him up at 9.7% ownership now. So the ownership has been coming up as everybody has been seeing Kittle smashing every week. But still, optimal 7.4% of the time. Some negative leverage there, but certainly we've seen it multiple weeks in a row now, and I wouldn't be that surprised to see him continuing to smash with Brock Purdy at quarterback. So yeah, I definitely have interest in George Kittle. And I just want to note, since we mentioned Travis Kelce is in a different price tier, that like the fact that he's 17.3% optimal despite the price tier, like that's with the price factored in as well with Travis Kelce. So he just looks like really a smash play here. Kittle obviously looks great. Hawkinson, I'm always surprised to see that we don't have Hawkinson optimal more often than he is, just given how involved he's been since he joined the Vikings. Like, he's just targeted double-digit times like every week, and he's 5,400 still against this Packers defense, which, yeah, it's a little bit of a run funnel, but it's not like they're elite against the pass either. I kind of like TJ Hawkinson once again this week. Actually, he's I would say similar to George Kittle in that he's been smashing. The ownership's coming up. I still think that I'm willing to go there to the mid-range, despite a little bit of negative leverage. It would not be that surprising to me to see one of these guys get 20 plus fantasy points again. So I like all of these kind of the mid-range tight end, the mid to high range. So I like Travis Kelce. I like George Kittle. I like TJ Hawkinson. I also like Dallas Goedert a little bit. 7.3% projected ownership, 8.4% chance to be an optimal. He can go back there as well. We've been seeing Evan Ingram just absolutely smashing a couple times recently. He's only 4,400. Again, we don't really know what the Jaguars, how they're going to play it this week in a game that they don't really need to win. But we've got Ingram at 13.6% projected ownership, 12.1% chance to be an optimal. Honestly, I guess Ingram, if I had to not play one of these guys, it's probably Ingram, just because of the added concern and the box score chasing being a little bit of a concern for me. I think he's probably the one that I get away from among these, mid to high end tight ends. What do you think there?
It's hard to not like Ingram if we are going to end up getting the Jaguars guys not resting. I'd be more concerned about Etienne not getting full workload as compared to somebody like Ingram. He appears to be the main benefactor of Lawrence starting to break out from two factors. Number one, an efficiency standpoint, but also Lawrence seems to have had a lot of success just by locking into Evan Ingram. They've built up a really good rapport. The last 4 games, Evan Ingram is 8, 10, 15, and 7 targets. That's a lot of workload. And while the production and touchdowns, that could be hard to project sometimes for football purposes, if he's going to get that kind of targets, he's definitely underpriced. I don't think FanDuel and DraftKings have priced him up enough just relative to the target share.
Yeah, that's a really good point. His price is a little bit too low for his involvement. So maybe he's not a guy I should throw. Just the concern with who knows if they're going to play the full game is the only reason that I'm a little bit hesitant, but still certainly somewhere you can go. Cole Kmet at 4,500 against this Lions defense. Again, I said if I'm playing Fields, most likely I'm doing what everybody else is doing and just pairing him with Kmet and trying to get different elsewhere. But he's only got 8.6% projected ownership, 7% chance to be an optimal. Kmet in those weeks where Fields was smashing, Cole Kmet was also smashing. So I think that's another place you could go as well. David Njoku actually looks pretty good, 3.9% projected ownership, 6% chance of being optimal. A couple other names that I want. Robert Tonyan against the Vikings, I think is playable. He's just 3,600, especially if Christian Watson is out. Tonyan should benefit from a few more looks, I would think. We've got him at under 2% ownership. Who else would I? Oh, I want to say if I have this sorted wrong. If Kylan Granson is out again, I think you could go back to Jelani Woods. We just saw Nick Foles was targeting Jelani Woods pretty heavily in that showdown slate on Thursday. I think that you could go back to Jelani Woods as somebody who's shown some offensive upside here for the Colts. So I think you could go back to Jelani Woods as well.
Yeah, one thing about Jelani Woods that had stood out to me is I know that Lofty was on him for that primetime football game, and that game was absolutely miserable. But Lofty had a bet on the over receiving yards for Jelani Woods, and I'm pretty sure he did it on like the third play of the game. He hit the over. It was a really low prop, and he caught a long pass, and I think it was like a 17-yard pass when his prop was like 15 and a half. So did it almost immediately. So yeah, if we do see Branson ruled out, then you can make a case that Jelani Woods should be in there. In general, though, it's going to be the tight ends I build around Ingram, Kelsey, George Kittle, and then anything else is just going to be who correlates with stacked quarterbacks. Other than that, it's not really the greatest position of the week. But let's go to our
D-Hop
favorite.
just got ruled out. Somebody just said DeAndre Hopkins ruled out. Yeah,
yeah, it was actually kind of trending that way yesterday. You got the word that the Cardinals were considering not playing him, which at this point in the year, when you're considering not playing somebody, good chance you're not going to play them. So he's sitting, but still it's a total disaster with the quarterback spot that it's going to kind of be hard to trust anybody. It does make, I guess it makes Dortch look better, but.
And Marquise Brown becomes a wide receiver one.
It's still hard.
But they still have David Blau at quarter. Like, it's just fucking Colt. Just play Colt. I mean, I guess Colt McCoy maybe is injured, but I would feel so much better about these guys if Colt McCoy was starting. It's a little bit harder without him, with David Blau starting. But playable. Yeah. Swoop just asked, or somebody. Yeah, will Dortch be chalky now with D-Hop out? I don't know. I kind of think probably, just because of how involved he was last week and the price tag, and obviously now he's got it's a little bit easier path with Hopkins out, but yeah, it's hard to say.
Let me look through. So Blau has made, it looks like, one career start. Is that correct? Oh, no, he's made a handful. He made a handful in 2019. He made one start in 2020. He had 49 passing yards in that game. His starts in 2019, he had 122 passing yards, 117, 260, 205, 280. So some of them not totally nothing, but a little concerning that the last time he stepped on the field, he had 49 passing yards.
Yeah, not great.
Hard to have any kind of real upside. So yeah, we'll see. It obviously just happened. We're going to need some projections and ownership updates, and you guys can catch all that tomorrow. Deep dive live before lock. We have our marathon football show that you guys could check out by liking this video and subscribing to the YouTube channel. But let's close out the show, Neil, with our favorite stack of the week. So if you're building one stack in either a single entry tournament or a large field tournament, what would be your quarterback to pass catching combinations?
Let me just add in, I didn't mention Brandon. I meant to mention Brandon Ayuk as another guy in a great matchup with Debo out, somebody that I have some interest in. I think if I have to go to just one, I'm sort of tempted to go to Mike White with Michael Carter. In the largest field GPP, I might go to Mike White, Michael Carter, and Garrett Wilson. If you're not in a milli maker, somebody that a matchup that is probably a little bit more likely to hit. If Christian Watson is in, I might be tempted to go to the Packers. Man, it's a tough one this week. There's a lot of like decent options, no like great options. I'll just stick with my Jets one. I think I like the Jets here. I like the Mike White, Michael Carter, Garrett Wilson as a very low owned with Michael Carter in their contrarian stack.
I'm going with Brock Purdy to George Kittle. We've sent a bunch of really big games out of him, and also I'm committed at this point. I was running lineups before the show and giving Mike advice on who he should play, and I said that Goff would probably be my answer for just a small field type single entry thing. But for me, just based on some of the lineups I was running too and relative to ownership, I'm going to go Brock Purdy to George Kittle. Purdy's looked fantastic this year. I actually wouldn't be surprised if he steals the Offensive Rookie of the Year award because there hasn't really been a standout. So that's going to be my answer. And that is going to do it for Neil and I this week. Next weekend, instead of the Tournament Strategy Show, I believe we're going to be breaking down the Saturday slate because there's one of those on Saturday next week. So check that out. Once again, before you guys leave, thank you very much for watching. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and good luck on tomorrow's slate.